Good morning. We are in 2 Corinthians still. Anybody need a book? I got couple of books here. If you forgot yours or misplaced yours, or one of them's got writing in it, so might have some answers. But all right, I have written down that we're on page 46 of our workbook, chapter 3. All right, studying 1st and 2nd Corinthians, of course, a little review. It is believed from the way things are written and other letters that are referenced that there were more than 2 letters to the Corinthians from Paul. This is, most believe this is probably more like 3rd or 4th Corinthians, but it doesn't mean that what we have isn't complete. We have everything we need. First couple of chapters, we explored that this is kind of the after that painful visit. So 1 Corinthians was written, uncomfortable things had to be addressed. Then there was a visit that was also not comfortable. And then we looked at 1st and 2nd Corinthians, and it's kind of Paul's like, all right, well, this is how we move forward. You have to forgive those that have corrected their behavior. We shouldn't be holding, sins over people. God doesn't hold sins over us once we repent. And so now that this issue is resolved, that was kind of where we left off with chapter 2. Chapter 3 is going to take a little different tone than the first two. And we're going to see Paul is addressing a few things, but one thing we're going to see is he's addressing people that are still having issues with, I guess you could say, getting over the old law, right? Y'all remember some things from 1 Corinthians where the old new law, where people are having trouble leaving behind some of the old law? Do you remember any of that? What were some of those things? Do you remember? Everything new, right? It seemed like just about everything new they were having trouble with. Specifically old law, though, there were traditions and things they were used to doing that were right to do under the old law. And then when we get into the new law, they're not commanded. And there was some binding of things there. Remember the meats. There was some issue with meat. People saying, oh, well, we should just be able to eat meat. Some people saying we should eat veggies. We saw all sorts of conflict arising over those things that really, Paul is saying, look, these aren't things that should be bound anymore, right? And we see that come up in multiple letters to the early churches. It's not limited just to 1 Corinthians. But of course, you remember the Judaism, right? That was God's people. And then you've got the Jews mixing with the Gentiles, with these people from all different religious backgrounds, all coming together. Some people, the Jews, some of them probably think they've got it pretty figured out, and then their world's kind of been turned upside down with the new law, right? And so we see that as an issue really throughout the early church. We're going to see that continues here in chapter 3 of 2 Corinthians. We're also going to see where this idea, and we looked at it briefly in 1 Corinthians, but this idea that basically you need a letter of recommendation. And so in Corinth was kind of known as like this big intelligent city, where there was lots of new thoughts that would come about. There was lots of intelligent minds that would gather there to discuss new things that were coming out, whether it be religious, whether it be government, politics, stuff like that. There were the intelligent minds there. And really, when somebody would come in with this new idea, they needed a letter of recommendation. They needed a letter of recommendation to basically have the authority or even the respect of other people to say, okay, yeah, we'll listen to them because they're recommended by this person. And we see that even in the early church, right? We saw at the end of 1 Corinthians, if you remember, Paul was like, hey, I may not be here, but you remember who he kind of said, listen to? Into 1 Corinthians. I may not be back. I'm going to try to come back. Do not despise this person. Beginning of 2 Corinthians, we see the letter of 2 Corinthians is from both of them. Timothy, there we go. Yep, Timothy. So we see he kind of gives this letter of recommendation at the end of 1 Corinthians for Timothy. So it's not a foreign concept. It's not a letter dedicated just to Timothy, but he does kind of sign off there, right? And this kind of thing even happens today some, where, all right, well, we're looking for, let's say we're discussing who is going to come for a gospel meeting. We don't just say, all right, well, here's somebody I found on the internet that I know nothing about. Generally, we'll say, hey, how about this person? Because I've heard things they do. I've spoken to them about this. I know some of the teachings that they have taught that are right aligned with the Bible. And so it's not that we write a letter, but usually somebody speaks to, all right, this would be a good person for us to have speak in our assembly, right? Letter of recommendations, of course, are seen in today's secular world as well, right? There's positions within companies that you cannot promote into unless you have a recommendation from a supervisor. You have to have a letter of recommendation that goes along with your application that says, yes, I believe this person can do it and this is why. Okay? So this idea of letters of recommendation is something we're pretty familiar with, except here in Corinth, they weren't just familiar with it. It was almost a requirement for these smart minds to really accept what you're saying here. Now, if you remember, Paul isn't new here, right? This isn't like Paul is just walking in here. This isn't his first letter. But somebody or some group of people has decided, hey, we've never gotten a letter of recommendation from him. And so they've brought that up in the church. He's either received a letter saying, hey, Paul, we need your letter of recommendation. These people say so. Or somebody's actually told him during that painful visit that he talked about. We don't know exactly why that's being brought up, but we know there is some kind of challenge as to, okay, where's your letter of recommendation? If we're going to continue listening to you, we need your letter of recommendation. So that's a little bit of background before we get into 2 Corinthians chapter 3. So 2 Corinthians chapter 3, we'll go ahead and start in verse 1. I'll read verses 1 through 6, and we'll answer a few questions here. Do we begin again to commend ourselves? Or do we, as some others, epistles of commendation to you, or letters of commendation from you? Ye are our epistle, written in our hearts, known and read of all men. Forasmuch as ye are manifestly declared to be the epistle of Christ, ministered by us, written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not in tables of stone, but in fleshly tables of the heart. And such trust we have through Christ to God word. Not that we are sufficient of ourselves to think anything of ourselves, but our sufficiency is of God, who also hath made us able ministers of the New Testament, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter killeth, but the Spirit giveth life. All right, so it kind of some almost confusing language there. Some of the newer translations kind of help to smooth this over, but it still takes kind of some breaking down. Let's go ahead and answer some questions and then discuss. Question number 1: what is the answer to Paul's question in verse 1? He starts off with a question. What's the answer? There's actually a couple of questions there. Somebody read verse 1. All right, so do we need letters of commendation or letters of recommendation? Do we need it? No. Okay. No, they don't. Now, then he's going to get into why they don't need it. Okay? That's what we're going to break down here. What is the difference between the work of the letter and the work of the Spirit? Question number 2. Yeah, the work of the law. Absolutely. Yeah, that's the new law, right? The work of the Spirit, that would be the new law. All right, let's look at verse 6 here. And to answer this question. Second part there. But of the Spirit. Okay. For the letter killeth, but the Spirit giveth life. Okay, so what is the difference between the work of the letter and the work of the Spirit? Well, the letter killeth, and the Spirit giveth life. All right, so we're talking about the difference here in the old law and the new law, okay? Now, a lot of people will look at the old law, and and even when we're reading through it, it can kind of seem the way these things are written that the old law was bad. I mean, when you think killeth, right? Oh yeah, that's bad, right? That killeth, but the Spirit giveth life. Well, that sounds good and bad, but what we're really going to see Paul is going to start breaking down as we continue through here isn't that it was bad. It was still from God. It still served its purpose. It still was a good law for them to follow if they wanted to try to be pleasing to God. But we're going to see that the new law is so much better. I mean, I for one, and this is kind of superficial, but I for one am thankful that we don't have to abide by the things in the old law, aren't you? I mean, the sacrifices that we would have to do, the different restrictions on how far you can walk on certain days, things like that. Like there were some restrictions in the old law that, hey, under the new law, we don't have a lot of that, right? Now, the expectation that we follow the old law, that they follow the old law, is still there under the new law. Right? We can't just say, well, since it seems easier for us to follow, maybe we won't have to follow it as closely, right? We still have to follow it. But we're going to see here as we study that this new law is so much better, and he's really going to be talking and promoting how much better the new law is. Oh no, and that's pointed out. Was it possible? Yes. What it had become from these religious elites, there was no way to follow it, right? There was no way to keep everything perfectly, right? And it also wasn't, when you read about perfect, we'll read not in this section, but we'll read about the new law being more perfect. That doesn't mean that the old law wasn't perfect. Again, it was from God. Perfect means complete, right? So the new law kind of completes the whole Bible. It kind of, all right, this is why the old law was there. This is the reason. Now the new law is going to complete it. All right, let's look at question 3 real quick. Of what did Paul speak that was written with the Spirit of the living God? In verses 1 through 6. What was he talking about when he said it was written with the Spirit of the living God? The epistle of Christ. That's right. The epistle, or the letter, right, is written with the Spirit. It's inspired letters, right? Okay, number 4. Give 4 descriptive words used to modify epistle in verse 2. Let's look at verse 2. Ye are our epistle, written in our hearts, known and read of all men. What are 4 descriptive words there to modify the word epistle? Our. All right, our. Okay? Our epistle. Okay, what else? What else is describing that epistle? So it's our epistle, right? Our letter. What's that? I can't understand you. What was the first word you said, Danny? Maybe a different translation than I have. Read your translation real quick, Danny. All right, so we've got our epistle, and what else is describing that epistle? Known. It's a known epistle. Okay, what else? Written in our hearts. And Danny, now I think I'm having trouble hearing today. I think you're saying that last piece of known of all men. Is that what you said? Okay. Yep. So it's known of all men. It's written. It's in our hearts, and it's our epistle. Okay. All right. Next question there. Number 5. In what 2 things was the epistle not written? With ink or tablets of stone. Okay. So, was the letter written in ink? Were there epistles written in ink? Let me put it that way. What? The new law. Okay, it's in our heart. Now, physically, it was written in ink, right? But the point he's trying to make here is, look, this is not something just physical that you behold. Like, the old law was on what? 10 Commandments? Tablets of stone, right? So, it's not on tablets of stone. It's not written in ink, right? That's not what the epistle is about. It's the importance of it isn't contained in anything physical, right? The importance of it is what it does to our hearts, right? All right. Again, when you talk about the old law, you talk about the issues with the old law. You talk about the religious elites that had kind of taken over the old law and established it into something really it wasn't ever really meant to be. They were worried about, are you keeping it to the letter all the time, right? And they had done that so much that they distracted it, or they were distracted from, okay, are we living it? Is it on our hearts? Yeah, it's important to know it, but if you don't live it, I mean, you can memorize the entire Bible. Will that save you? That's not going to save you. You can know every single word of the Bible and be lost, right? You could every year read the Bible. Once I knew somebody once that read the Bible every month, right? Every single month for a year they read the Bible. A few years later, they denied Christ. Did reading the Bible, every single word, every month of the year, save that person? No. It's knowing it all isn't the important part. Now, do we need to know it to make sure we obey it? Absolutely. But if we don't live it, if we don't put it on our hearts, if we don't act it, if we don't become the church, if we're not the letter of recommendation to the world of Christ, it's useless, isn't it? Then it's just something physical. All right. Number 6. Or did we just do that? No. Where was the epistle written? What's that? In our hearts. Absolutely. Paul's sufficiency came from, this is question number 7. God. That's right. So Paul's sufficiency, that means that's all he needed was from God. So he's getting these challenges. Where's your letter of recommendation? Right? If we're going to listen to you, you've got to give us a letter of recommendation. You've got to have this commendation letter. That's how you get accepted in the Corinthian society, is you have a letter of recommendation from some religious elite, right? Did the religious elites like Paul? Not most of them, right? They wanted him dead. And they tried to kill him a few times. And so they're not going to write that. But what he says is, look, I don't need that. I've got it in God. All I need is God. If I've got God on my side, I don't need this letter of recommendation. I don't have to have all this fancy credentials that you're looking for here, right? Question number 8. The apostles were made the what? Ministers of the New Testament. That's in verse 6 there, okay? Apostles were made the ministers of the New Testament. All right, let's pause here for just a second. There is still, in some churches, this idea that if you don't have the right physical credentials, that you can't be effective in the church. Now, it's usually kind of an unspoken idea, but you will see it oftentimes when if you ever, and you probably don't, but if you ever look at job postings for preachers in the church, and you look at some of the larger congregations, like some large congregations are great, but you look at some of the larger congregations in the job requirements, sometimes it'll say master's degree in biblical studies, doctorate in something from one of these universities, something like that, right? What is the biblical requirement of being a minister? Who can be a minister? Who can be a minister of the gospel? Okay, anybody that believes, obeys, and knows what they're talking about. Yeah. Again, Paul's getting this challenge because he doesn't have the credentials. But he's saying, look, everybody's been called to be ministers. That's what the apostles are doing out here. They're ministering, right? They're ministers of the New Testament. Now, part of the problem is that word minister isn't, and I've talked about this recently, the way we use it today is not the way it was used in the New Testament, right? What is a minister? Do y'all remember? minister is a helper, right? A minister is a servant, okay? So when he's saying, look, a minister, I can be a servant. The apostles were called to be servants. We're called to be servants of the New Testament. We're supposed to be taking this New Testament. I don't need a letter of recommendation. God has already told me what I'm supposed to do. Okay, so earlier I asked what is the requirement and who can be. Who should be ministers of the New Testament today? All Christians should be, right? All Christians should be ministers. All Christians have the call. All Christians have been told, look, you take this gospel and you take it out there so that people know how to be saved from their sins, right? You minister to it. You take it out. You be a servant of the gospel, and that's what you do, right? I've been asked by people at work. They'll find out that I preach. We'll be talking about it, and they'll say, "Oh, well, when were you ordained?" You've probably heard things like that before. When were you ordained, right? Or who ordained you, right? Well, the correct response for any gospel preacher is, well, God ordained me. God's the one that told me to take this gospel, right? I didn't have to. People didn't have to say, all right, well, we'll vote on this. If you can pass these tests, then you can do this. No, you're not ordained by any men. God has ordained everyone to be ministers, right? Everyone's been told, everybody's been given that charge. Everyone that is a Christian has been selected to be a minister. That's what ordained means. Ordained means to be put in place. Every one of us have been put in place in order to carry that when we obeyed the gospel. All right, let's look at question number 9. In what respect did the old covenant have no? Well, I don't think we've read that yet. All right, let's look at verses 7 through 11. If somebody wouldn't mind reading 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 7 through 11. All right, thank you. So this is where, where people will say, "Oh, the apostles, they couldn't wait to get rid of that old law. They just thought it was trash. They didn't, We can see from these letters that the old law was no good." Well, that's not what Paul says. Here, verse 7, the ministration of death, written and engraved in stones. Remember, that's the old law. Remember the 10 Commandments engraved in stones. They would have all been familiar with this. So, was glorious. Would you say something that is useless? Would you say something that wasn't good was glorious? You wouldn't say that, right? You wouldn't say, "Oh, that glorious piece of trash," right? You wouldn't say that, right? And so, but he's saying, look, there's something even more glorious. There's something that far excels this old law. Again, there are some people in this early church that they have dedicated their lives up to this point to the old law. And they love the old law, right? It's what has guided them through life up to this point. They love it. And so you can imagine that would be hard to get rid of. And Paul isn't saying, look, it's no good. He's saying it was glorious. But we've got something that excels that. We've got something that's even more glorious. The way that I kind of think about it is if, I don't know, we have, what's the closest mountain to here? Or let's say, I'll put it this way. Columbus, Belmont, you ever go out there and there's that big drop off down there in the river? I mean, it's pretty neat to go up there, isn't it? It's pretty neat to, kind of nervous to make sure the kids stay away from the edge, but it's pretty neat to go up there and look across that almost gorge that has been formed there, where the land just drops off, where they stretch that big chain across in the Civil War. It's pretty neat. It's pretty neat to go there and see that. I mean, it is a neat sight, and you can say, look at God's creation here. This is glorious. Does it compare to standing on the side of the Grand Canyon and looking across? I've never done it. I hope to one day. I've seen pictures, right? Those of you that have gone to the Grand Canyon, does Columbus, Belmont, looking across that water compare to looking across the Grand Canyon? Danny's saying no, right? It's pretty glorious to go to Columbus, Belmont. Oh yeah, that's neat. It doesn't even compare. The old law is Columbus, Belmont. The new law is the Grand Canyon, right? Wow, this is breathtaking, right? This is so much better. The old law served its purpose, but look what we have now. And that's what he's trying to get across here. This is, yes, it's okay that we had glory in that old law. But don't go back. Look at what we have now. We have the Grand Canyon, right? This is glorious. All right. So question number 9, in what respect did the old covenant have no glory? So that's what I was saying there. It didn't have literally no glory. It was glorious, but compared to the new covenant, it's just some little overlook in Kentucky, right? Compared to the new covenant. All right. Question number 10. Exodus 32, 15 and 16. Somebody would turn to that. Read that. Exodus 32, 15 and 16, please. All right, so we don't have to read 34, 1 through 4. You can on your own time. It just describes the old law more. But what was written and engraven on stones, we've talked about it multiple times here. This is the old law. This is the 10 Commandments, right? Physically, by God, was written on stones before, of course, Moses threw it off and had to rewrite it himself. But that's what he's referring to here. And again, the audience he's talking to, these people with Jewish background, and even those without Jewish background, they would have known, because it's a major religion, they would have known that he was talking about the 10 Commandments here. All right, number 11, that which was written and engraven in stones is called the ministration of what? Death and condemnation. All right, he's saying, look, the old law was really good at showing you how serious this stuff is. Death and condemnation, right? It is real good at showing you how serious God is about following what he says, right? The new law, not that other stuff isn't serious anymore, but it's how you can learn how to now have life from that. It's how you can learn to have eternal life in spite of how serious God is about this stuff that brings death, that brings condemnation. All right, number 12, the gospel is called the ministration of what? Righteousness? Yes, and spirit. Spirit and righteousness. Right? Sounds a lot better than death and condemnation, doesn't it? This is how you can learn how to be right. This is how you can learn what the Spirit wants you to do. This is how you can learn how to move forward from that death and condemnation that we learn about in the old law. Number 13, Paul said that which was what was glorious. Done away, or cast away, right? It is becoming increasingly popular. There's several social media influencers even that I come across that will say, look, we were never meant to abandon the old law. We were never meant to stop following the old law. Christianity was just an addition to that. They need to read 2 Corinthians chapter 3, right? Paul says that old law, that which was written and engraven in stones, it was done away. It was glorious, but it was done away. That period is past, right? Is cast away. Second part of that question, but that which what is more glorious? Remains. That which is still here, right? God's word, the New Testament, the new covenant made possible because of Christ's blood. That is what remains. That is what we're to follow now. All right. For further enlightenment on the passing of the law, see Ephesians 2:14 through 16, Colossians 2:14, Galatians 3:19 through 29, Galatians 5 verse 4, and Acts 15 verse 10. I don't have enough time to get to all that. We got about a minute and a half left. We'll pick up there on our next Sunday during class on question number 14. One thing that would help me is if you haven't already read those passages and answered those questions, go ahead and do that now, and then we'll answer them and discuss them quickly starting next Sunday. So, again, we got about a minute, so we'll go ahead and end class there. Thank you all for your attention and comments.